Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Robert Wallace. Now, normally I don't sit and read long bios. I like to do the Cliff Notes version just to get onto the guest. In this case, I want to let you know who we're about to talk to and why you need to be listening. I'm so thrilled to have had Bob Wallace on the show. He allowed me to call him Bob because he has had an illustrious career over the last 40 plus years in industry, in social change, in politics, and in education. So let me just give you the bio that he shared with me, and that way, when we jump over to my conversation with Bob, that you will know exactly why you want to listen to his story and this episode. So as I mentioned, Robert Wallace is an internationally known entrepreneur, author, business consultant, and keynote speaker. Over 40 years of industry experience spanning engineering, energy, IT, and executive coaching. And today, he leverages his expertise to educate and inspire entrepreneurs, executives, and audiences all over the world. He grew up in Baltimore, in the projects of South Baltimore, in a place called Cherry Hill, amidst poverty and racial segregation in the 60s and 70s. He overcame social and economic obstacles throughout his own journey. He went literally from rags to riches in his story to become a successful entrepreneur. Out of college, he worked with IBM, DuPont, and Procter before leaving IBM to start his own IT consulting firm called BITHGROUP. Today, BITHGROUP is a company that does cybersecurity and IT services. And he's also more recently started Bithenergy, an energy services and technology company. And he also, through his company, Robert Wallace Media, he has also founded EntreTeach Learning Systems. So this man has been an entrepreneur now for about 25 to 30 years. Throughout his work, throughout his life, Bob has authored 8 books on wealth creation, strategic partnerships, business spirituality, emerging markets, and entrepreneurship. And right now, he's busy writing 3 more books. His books have addressed the challenges faced by women, people of color, entrepreneurs of all stripes, and domestic and global emerging markets. Bob, in these books, tells the story of these amazing people with an insightful approach that makes his writing equally compelling to large corporations and entrepreneurs. Today, Bob is, like I said, focused on education and coaching. His dynamic keynote presentations and hands-on workshops are designed for personal and professional growth. He's been married for more than 43 years, has 5 children and 9 grandchildren. He frequently leads groups on mission trips across the world to Africa and Latin America, where he's helped start businesses, orphanages, hospitals, clinics, schools. He's avid about education and STEM program. And recently, and you'll hear about this towards the end of the interview, Bob recently made history by becoming the first independent candidate for mayor to earn a spot on the ballot in the city of Boston. He came in second place with more than close to 50,000 votes. And today, Bob is still active in politics. He's built a political coalition that will forever change the political terrain of Baltimore City. He's been an affiliate professor of business at Loyola University. And as I said, he went to school at University of Pennsylvania and then earned his MBA from the Amos Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. There's even more stuff here. I mean, I'm just really, really thrilled to have had Bob on the show. I learned so much even before we hopped on the call in all of my preparation, watching his video, reading his articles, just learning about his life. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring him here to you on the show. With everything that's going on in the world, not just in the entrepreneurship world, not just in the tech world, but in our social world and our political world. Bob is a man with decades and decades of experience working through and combating through his personal experience, structural racism, and now consulting and working with companies to help them understand the importance of diversity, inclusion, and how to really bridge the divide that exists out there even today in 2021. So that's all I've got to say. Now, let's head over to my conversation with Bob Wallace, speaker, author, and consultant.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing good, my friend.
I've been watching videos of you all morning getting ready for this. I feel like we've been talking now for the last 2 hours, man. I've been on YouTube. I've been on your website.
I'm in trouble now.
No, I feel a little bit, one, I'm honored that you join us here on the show. I feel like I've gotten like thousands of dollars worth of free consulting just watching your videos already.
Oh, you're kind.
This is good, man. I enjoy this.
Thank you, God.
So if you're ready to go, I'd love to just jump right in and
Yes, sir.
get things rolling here.
Yes, sir.
I've got probably 4 or 5 pages of notes in front of me, and I was trying to figure out the best way to start the conversation because there's so many different parts of you and your experience and your contributions to the world that I'd love to get to. And what I thought we'd do is, because most of the people that listen to our podcast are startup founders and entrepreneurs, maybe just start with your transition from working at big company, IBM, DuPont, Procter Gamble, that decision to move into the world of entrepreneurship that you've been doing now since the 90s. And then from there, we can start peeling back different parts of how you got there and the challenges you overcame and get some perspective based on your experience. So if you're cool with that, as I understood it, reading your bio, you had worked at, like you said, you're a mechanical engineer, right, by trade. Then you went to business school. So mechanical engineer at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. Then you got your MBA from Dartmouth, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then from there, so now you're working at big company. We're just going to jump in mid-career, right? You're working at IBM. You've done DuPont, Procter & Gamble. Is that right?
That's
what sort of work were you doing within those companies as a mechanical engineer?
Absolutely. So great transition. As you said, my background is engineering, mechanical engineering to be exact. And after I got out of University of Pennsylvania with a degree in mechanical engineering and applied mechanics, I needed to work. I had a brand new wife and I had a child on the way. My wife, we met at UPenn. She's a biomedical engineer and she's brilliant. People who know us, they know that she's the brains of the operations and the good looks, right? I just sign the checks, but she's the one that's really on top of it. Biomedical engineering, imagine this, biomedical engineering in the 70s, right? Just brand new field. She's the first woman and the first African-American to enroll in that program. And she's just a brilliant woman. So we leave UPenn, get married, about to have our first child. I need to work. And so although I've always had the spirit of being an entrepreneur and the dream of it, I needed a job right away. So I took a job at DuPont in Delaware, in Wilmington, Delaware, and was there 5 years. I became a part of a group at DuPont called the Engineering Field Division, right? Now, that may not mean much to your viewers, but let me tell you what that meant in DuPont terms. We were like the Green Berets of engineering, right? I mean, the most difficult engineering problems that DuPont had, they would give it to us. And then we would be dispatched all over the country to solve those problems. So I was very good engineer, very good at problem solving. But even then I knew, I wanted to start my own business. And so for me, after 5 years at DuPont, I said, you know what? I could stay here at DuPont and would do very well. And my wife joined me at DuPont. So we're both at DuPont, making nice salaries, living a nice life. And we could have just rolled that pony, into the sunset, right? But we said, no, I said, no, that's not my destiny. And so we decided that what would round me out from engineering was some business training. So I applied to some business schools. I was blessed, got to some really good schools. I chose Tuck School at Dartmouth, the Amos Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. And I'm glad I did. I mean, it's up in New England in the mountains and snow, and it's a whole different experience than what I was used to, having, been raised in Baltimore in the projects, tough neighborhood, 5 boys, 5 brothers, living in the projects with the violence and the crime and the drugs and all that dysfunction. From that to upper New England in the mountains and snow, which at that time was not a very diverse environment, right? I think New Hampshire may have had its African-American population may have been 0.1% of back when I was there. But it was a great place, great people, great culture. I mean, just wonderful for me and my family. And so we really had a good time there. Left Dartmouth with my MBA and decided that I wanted to go to IBM for a job. Now, let me tell you why. So I was very intentional about that because I admitted in my mind when I was in business school that my area of entrepreneurship would be in technology in general, but information technology in particular. And at that time in the 80s, you couldn't find a better technology company than IBM
Sure. Oh,
to get training and to get the kind of exposure that I felt that I needed. So I joined IBM right out of business school, stayed there 5 years, did some wonderful things at IBM. We ushered in some new technologies, the networking technologies, the mainframe PCs were just beginning to explode. So I was part of that. Microsoft, them just kicking off. And, this is like the really beginnings of the IT, the IT explosion, then later the internet explosion. So I was really on the front end of those emerging technologies. And so at that point, I was able to go ahead and stay there. Excuse me a second, I'm sorry.
No worries. You're a busy man.
And really go ahead and really ride that wave. And it was a ride the wave of where we were now beginning as a country, that the vision of using information technology to expand productivity. It was always talked about, but now we were really in the midst of making it happen. So in the 80s and the 90s, when that technology really began to get into our foundation and really began to be exploited, that was where I was in launching my business. And so I knew then, leaving IBM to become an entrepreneur, for me, it was the right time, at the right moment. And so I was really grateful to have that happen for me.
Was there some kind of experience while you were at Dartmouth that led you to IT, or something specifically that you're like, of all the things you could have done, having a mechanical engineering background,
Right.
making that transition into IT? It might sound to somebody who's not technical, you're like, well, it's still technical stuff,
Right.
But it's really a totally different field. I mean, you're going from, mechanical to IT is very different.
Sure.
Was there something about that I remember the time in the 80s as a child, sort of seeing computers, getting our first PC and
That's right.
dot matrix printer and all those things. You're like,
That's
wow,
right.
this is so
That's
awesome.
right.
The first Apple computers coming out, those
That's
kinds of
right.
things. So,
Absolutely.
so what was it about IT that drew you to that field? And what about that field made you make the jump to become an entrepreneur?
So when I went to Dartmouth for my MBA, truth be told, I was planning on getting into like investment banking, right? I wanted to go either to Wall Street or to be a consultant at Booz Allen or McKinsey.
Sure.
I had the opportunity.
Not different than what MBAs do today. So,
yeah, right. So, that was where I was headed. But I'll never forget this. One of my mentors at Tuck was Dr. Brian Quinn. You may not remember him, but Dr. Quinn was one of the pioneers of entrepreneurship training and business strategy. This guy was a guru, wrote these books. He was a wonderful human being. And he became my mentor. And he would bring in, not just him, but the whole school. So they were bringing in these speakers, Scott. Now, imagine they're bringing people like the guy who started Lotus 123, guy that started, Microsoft, Bill Gates, a lot of the early tech titans that were just kind of getting started, right? And I listened to them, and it became clear to me, and this is the benefit of being an engineer, that the future, the near and far future of wealth creation in America, and maybe the world for that matter, would be driven by technology. Now, keep in mind, this is the 80s. So the PCs had just started to come out, and it was very early stages. But I could see enough. I said, wow. I said, technology is going to be major. And in my area of technology, information technology, my sweet spot, I said, that's going to be a major player in the coming economy. And I want to be a part of that. And I felt that, I could have gone investment banking, made a lot more money, but wouldn't have had as much fun, Scott. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so at that point, I said, okay, entrepreneurship, technology, information technology, and that's what's going to be Bob Wallace in the very near future.
Yeah, it's funny because I want to pick up on this thread in just a couple of minutes. But when you talk about like, it's technology is the wave, and that's the 80s. I remember that again. It's like these go in waves every generation, because I remember the late 90s, early 2000s, working in a publishing company in New York, thinking everything's going online, and I want to get out to Silicon Valley. And in 2001, I moved to Silicon Valley because I want to be part of technology and the wave. Right. And now you see this whole new wave coming out, artificial intelligence and data analytics, and
That's right. That's
we're
right.
going to fly to Mars now, and the whole new crop of kids coming out are like, oh, I want to be part of information technology. And the MBAs are starting companies because they don't want to go to Wall Street.
Exactly right. They
So
don't.
every generation we see that wave. It's just a different part of the curve, but the wave is still.
No, that's true, Scott. That's true, Scott. Every 50 years or so, as you said, there's a techno-economic wave, right, that drives through our economy and through our society. And you're right. I mean, I caught the IT wave in the 70s and 80s, right? You had the chips, starting to be created in high volumes. You got the foundation of the information technology, PCs and all that. I mean, that was the foundation. But then as you build upon that over the next 50 years, the wealth creation occurs either in the infrastructure builders, men and women who build the infrastructure to support that techno-economic wave. But the wealth is also at the back end of those who figure out how to use that infrastructure to drive solutions that solve problems of humanity. And that's where you get these big boosts and jumps in wealth creation in our nation and in our society. That is just incredible. And you're right, Scott, we're about to launch into the next wave, right? Which will be based upon, and as I say in one of my books, based upon robotics, artificial intelligence, biotech is going to be big, nanotechnology is going to be big in that wave. And so what we're doing as a company, we're trying to figure out where can we play on that new wave as a company to benefit from that growth and from that wealth creation potential.
When you first stepped away from IBM to start your first company, BITHGROUP, what niche within IT specifically, what was that first customer like, or those first couple of customers? How did you know, or probably didn't know for sure, but you're like, okay, here's where this is what we think we know as the opportunity, because IT is a big field. It's like biology. There's lots of fields of biology. What was that niche that you saw the gap in the marketplace that you felt like, hey, I can fill this to get a business off the ground?
You bet, Scott. So what I did, and what I think a lot of entrepreneurs do who maybe start in a corporate environment and decide to leave and do their own thing, I started with what I knew and what I already had traction in, and that was IT consulting services. So what I was doing at IBM, I started as a systems engineer at IBM for, in this case, it was large systems, large mainframe systems. And then I saw where the pattern, where the trend was going to mid-range and local area computing. So now I migrated down to that. Then I got into networking, all part of IBM, just anticipating where the market was going to go. So when I made my leap from IBM to Bob Wallace, the entrepreneur, what I basically did was take my skill set and even some of my customers, quite frankly, and relationships from IBM, and I pivoted to Bob Wallace. And so my first clients were often some of my existing customers or relationships from existing customers that provided the foundation of what I could do. And that was, in the early days, Scott, it was IT consulting. It was, let me come into your IT shop, bring my people, my resources to complement your staff. And then that was the model that we tried and worked. But it was the same model we used in IBM back in the 80s.
All right, thanks for listening. Listen, this is usually the time where I jump into a short commercial about downloading a copy of my book or asking you to send me an email if you want some help with your startup. I'm not going to do that today. Today, I want to take a moment and just call your attention to a topic that is affecting all of us every single day. It affects some of us way more than it affects others. And I think it's an opportunity for all of us to get better. And that's the topic of structural racism. This is a topic that really came to my attention last year with the Black Lives Matters protests, and all of the movement, the real movement across the country that happened in the wake of all of the unfortunate circumstances last year. That was also, I think, brought to my attention again even more with the Capitol riots that happened in early January. And our company, over the course of the last 9 months or so, have been working increasingly hard at doing our part. And I'm asking you to do your part as well. And so, I've spoken about this in much longer detail, so I'm not going to do that here in this podcast as part of this episode with Bob Wallace. What I do want to do is is really just ask you to take a step forward, wherever you are, as a tech founder. Maybe you're a single founder with a co-founder. Maybe you've got 20 people. Maybe you've got a 200-person team. There's always an opportunity for all of us to get better. Some of the things that we've been doing here is I've been hosting weekly Clubhouse rooms, and the topic of the tech sector tackling structural racism. I've been working with one of our clients and working with several partners that I've reached out to throughout the LinkedIn community, throughout the academic community, throughout the private sector community, to identify what specifically our company can do to take an active role in tackling structural racism. And while a lot of those plans are still in early incubation, early idea phase, and early testing phase, I do know that through my experience, simply spending just a little bit of time and effort each week focusing on this topic, I've been able to make a huge amount of progress. I've been able to build relationships with people that 6 months ago I didn't even know existed. I've been able to meet with university executives and people that run innovation departments and really start to understand what it means to take an anti-racism stance, to really go after and take a proactive role. And it's not enough to just be equal opportunity or to be diversity and inclusion, to really take an active role, to do more, to combat what is really a condition that all of us could do a little bit more on. So I'm asking you to do this very same. And if you're interested in learning more about what work we're doing here, some of the ideas we're developing, some of the ideas we're incubating, some of the programs that we're looking to roll out through public-private partnership, then all I'd ask you to do is send me a simple email. You can just shoot me an email, Scott, SCOTT, at salesqualia, sales, QUALIA.com, salesqualia.com, Scott at salesqualia.com. And in the subject line, you can just type in anti-racism. You can type in, tackling structural racism, something to just signal to me that you want to learn more about what you might do. And it could be simple as, joining the Clubhouse rooms that I'm hosting every week. It could be something as simple as using your network to introduce me and me introduce other people in my network to you that could help us all take a more active role in this. So you're going to see more from me and from our company in the coming weeks and months and years on this. I just know that I'm at a point in my life when my son came home one day in the afternoon back in the late spring, early summer, and without me prompting, without me suggesting, he on his own with his babysitter had sat down for the afternoon and drew and colored and mapped out a series of Black Lives Matter posters to post in our city park. When I saw that he was doing that, he knew enough about the world to know that life right now is not fair for all of us and that there's different treatment for different people based on their skin color. He knew that was wrong. He knew everything that was happening was wrong. And if an 8-year-old knew it was wrong, and I could see that he was taking action, then the obvious question I had to ask myself is, what am I doing? If he knows to do something, why don't I know to do something? And that was a real wake-up call for me. And so I suspect for a lot of you, you are impacted in a lot of ways emotionally with what you've seen over the past year. And maybe you're like me, where you aren't exactly sure where to start. And the starting point is simply to reach out to people like me that are taking some actions, to reach out to other people, members of the Black community. And it's not about asking them what to do or how you should act. It's about learning. It's about understanding. It's about seeing what's out there. And just like with your product at your startup, trying to identify your niche, try to identify how you could develop an idea and start making an impact, a social impact. We talk about idea to impact all the time with our companies. And that impact doesn't always have to be business impact. You have a platform that you can use. And the companies like Amazon and Facebook and Google that are the largest, most influential companies in the world 20 years ago were just startups, just like you. And the sooner that you make this part of your platform and the sooner that you incorporate a real action, a real proactive step every day to tackle structural racism, then the better off all of us are going to be. And that's a much bigger impact than any of us, I think, can make singularly with just a business impact with our companies. So that's it for now. Thanks for listening to this part of the episode. We're going to get back to my conversation with Bob Wallace. And again, just shoot me an email if you want to learn more about what we're doing here, how you might contribute, even if you just want to knock around some ideas, if you want some introductions to people I've met, whatever it is, if you want to take a proactive role, then I want to be part of that with you. So shoot me an email, scott@salesqualia.com, and let's make this happen. Okay, let's go back to my conversation with Bob Wallace. Got it. And then at that point, then you moved into other branches, because I saw you also started Bithenergy.
That's correct.
In 2007, which is almost like you're starting over again, because I saw an interview where you said your first year you installed 4 solar panels the whole year. Like that was year number 1, you got 4. But in 2017, you were the number 8 solar company in the country.
That's
so
correct.
9 years later,
that's correct.
4 solar panels to $250,000. So like finding those opportunities is something that.
Well, Scott, part of that too is following your passion, right? Because what I didn't tell you is that when I was studying engineering at the University of Pennsylvania, my area of research was renewable energy. So I was working with scientists from Israel and Egypt and the Middle East on developing solar plants, solar distillation technologies. I mean, all these renewable energy technologies that were not just emerging, but they were getting traction. That was where my passion was. But you got to remember, when I graduated from college, I mean, the solar energy was like, you couldn't get a job in that area. I mean, President Carter, you probably too young to know about President Carter.
I do remember. I barely remember President Carter. Yes, I do.
President Carter, I believe, was the first president who was an engineer. And what he tried to do was to put, what he did was he put solar panels on the White House. This is like 1976, 77. Well, of course, 1980, he lost to Ronald Reagan. So Reagan came in as president in 1980, and what did he do? He took down the solar panels, and he was a carbon-based oil and gas kind of president. And so our energy policy for the next 20 years or so just kind of stayed along that in carbon, oil and gas, right? 2007, 2008, President Obama gets elected. So this is a new era, new leadership. And what does he do? He makes a commitment to put big money into renewable energy technologies. The first president since Carter, in my opinion, to really put money where his mouth is. And so he did that. And when we saw that, Scott, we said, okay, so now we can play. So I went back to my old solar energy, renewable energy foundation and my relationships, and we brought that to the present. And we built this company that focused on renewable energy technologies. And that's the question, Scott, of watching the timing of the industry and society. Because every time there's change, there's opportunity. But it will only be opportunity for the entrepreneur that can see it and can execute on it. And that's what we did.
Okay. So now we've sort of set the stage. And now I want to get into the really good stuff. And what I mean by the really good stuff, I want to talk about, social impact. I want to talk about responsibility that entrepreneurs have, and right. The personal experience that you've had, your parents had, going all the way back to the 1963 civil rights marches.
That's right.
Through to your childhood. And it's easy for a lot of people, especially in my world of startup, tech bubble, where people are like, oh, that makes good sense. Like, yeah, the guy got an engineering degree, then he got an MBA, and then he worked at a big company, and then he started a company. And look, now he's a successful entrepreneur who's written books and starting companies all the time. Like, that's the path that we all should be on. But if we look at the timing, like you alluded to this briefly, it's like you grew up in the projects of, was it East Baltimore and Cherry Hill?
Baltimore,
right?
Yes. South Baltimore, yeah.
South Baltimore, right? 5 brothers that were in the military in special forces.
Right.
And this is in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
So people have a perception of how tough Baltimore might be now, given things that they've seen on TV over the last few years. It's never really been a city that's been able to kind of get out. It's kind of like Oakland in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It still has its civil structural problems. But you're like, oh, I went to Penn. I went and got an MBA. I worked at DuPont. I worked at IBM. I started my own company. So I want to talk through your personal experience as much as you're willing to share. What was that like as a Black man going through this process? Because you had decisions to make. You had influences around you,
yes,
good and bad. And I'm sure there were barriers that were beyond just like, oh, I'll fill out an application and write a good essay,
Right.
and then I'll get into Penn.
Right.
So I'll kind of let you take the talking stick from here, but maybe you could just talk through, what is that layer, that additional layer or layers of process and racism and structural barriers that you had to push through to really get to this place where you're fulfilling this dream.
Absolutely. So, well, if you look at my generation, and that is men and women who were raised through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, like you said, I mean, especially the 60s. I mean, the 60s was probably one of the most tumultuous times. Well, I don't know. Today is kind of crazy too, but okay. I'll stay with the 60s. I remember, Scott, 1968, which was, I think most people who were around that time felt like me, like the world is coming to an end, right? So, I mean, they just assassinated Dr. King. Then they took out Bobby Kennedy in June of that year. Then we had the Democratic Convention in Chicago, where the police went out of their minds and just attacked people. Our country, we felt, was just coming apart. And I mean, the racism then was pretty incredible. I mean, in Baltimore, people forget Baltimore is a southern city. And Baltimore I believe Baltimore was one of the first cities, for example, to implement redlining, right? Where they would lay out areas where African Americans could live and could not live, right? My grandfather would tell me stories about when they came back from fighting World War II, and they would come back to their homes in Baltimore and in Virginia and North Carolina, that the Black soldiers couldn't even vote. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own property. They couldn't benefit from the GI Bill, where you could go back to college and get degrees and the government would pay for it, or get mortgages for GIs to buy homes in the suburbs. Black men couldn't do that. And so my grandfather and my father, these men say, you know what? Enough is enough. And that was, if you look at it, that was the genesis of the civil rights movement in terms of its real muscle, because you had these soldiers, these Black soldiers, who were sent to Europe to fight Hitler and Nazis and to defend democracy for the world, right? And they did a wonderful job of doing it. And then they come back to their own country and they be treated like slaves. These soldiers said, my father and my grandfather, they said, no, this is not going to stand. And so they began to push back. And that was the genesis of the civil rights movement. And I think the heart of it. And so we had this environment, Scott, where it was very, very tense, very racial. And I remember this, and this is something I'll share with you. I remember 1968, April, Dr. King was shot, and we were watching TV, black and white TV, Scott, back in black and white TV, color TV. We didn't have color TV, right? Newsflash, Dr. King's been shot. And then some time goes on, it comes back, newsflash, Dr. King has been murdered. He's been assassinated. Scott, I'm telling you, that was between President Kennedy being assassinated in 1963 in Dallas, Dr. King, April 68, and then Bobby Kennedy, June 68. I mean, those things. And you had Malcolm assassinated in 65. I mean, it was just the violence and the terror was just incredible. And so, but I remember, Scott, which was a defining moment for me and my brothers, because I turned to my parents when they said Dr. King had been shot and he had been assassinated. I turned to my parents, never forget this. I said, Mom and Daddy, I said, why does America hate us so much? And my father was like, why do you say that? He said, because you have to hate somebody to treat them the way that they treat us. Now, here was a man who was a man of peace, a man of goodwill, and they even killed him, Daddy. So why do they hate us so much? And then my father, I think he recognized this was the defining moment for not only me, but my other brothers, because I think he knew, him and Mama, they knew if they didn't answer this question properly, that could send us off on the wrong track, right? And my father broke it down racially. He said, when I said America, he felt that meant white America, right? And he said to me, he said, son, well, it's like this. He said that white people are just like Black people. I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you got good white people and you got bad white people. And you got good Black people and you got bad Black people. So, son, your job's going to be to seek out the good people, and you build a coalition to change the world. And you can't assume that everybody is one way just because of the color of skin. Doesn't matter what the color of skin is. And my father, I think in his wisdom, he knew I better answer this question well, because my sons are looking at me and they're baffled. Like, wait a minute, how can this be? I remember Scott being in class, and I was a rebel. I mean, I was a rebel in school, right? I mean, I was a student of the civil rights movement, and I remember we had back in the old days. Not sure how it is now with the young folks today, but we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning before classes started. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for some. That's how I said it. And my teacher got really mad. Robert, that's not how you say it. Say it again. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for some. She got so mad at me, Scott. She sent me down to the principal's office, and they were telling me, you got to say it, you got to say it. And I said, when the day comes that is true, then I will say it. I will say it that way. But until that day, I'm not going to repeat a lie. Because in my mind, at that time in the 60s, it was a lie. It was not justice for all. It was not. And so I wasn't going to play that game. And so I've always been an instigator of change. And I guess I got that from my parents because they were on the march in Washington in 1963. And so they really were part of that, and they put that seed in us. But there are three things, Scott, that our parents taught us. And I think your parents probably taught you the same thing, maybe. And they were, the way you succeed, mom and daddy always say that your present does not dictate your future. Yes, we have lack of resources today, sons, but it doesn't mean we have to stay there. Now, let me tell you how you transition from poverty to prosperity. You do three things. This is what my parents taught us. Number one, they taught us to have faith in God. Very spiritual parents, to have faith in God. Number two, education. The way out of poverty is education. And three is hard work. You got to show up day in and day out, even when you don't feel like it. Right? And you got to take the racism, you got to take the classism, you got to take the ignorance and the hate, and you got to deal with it, right? And not let it destroy you. And so those three things became the platform in which my brothers and I were able to move from poverty to prosperity. Now, my older brothers, as I mentioned earlier, they took the military path. So they all joined the military at 18 and stayed in there for a career, went to Vietnam, multiple tours in Vietnam, Scott, and came back. I mean, they built illustrious careers as soldiers. I was the first son who didn't go into the military, but went to college instead. And the reason I did is because my dad made me go. Because I was ready to go. I mean, I wanted to go fight the war, man. I wanted to go, get in training to take my gun. And, my dad said, no. He said, no, you're not going to do it. You're going to be different. You're going to college. And my dad was the one that directed me into that path. And I think, Scott, that's the kind of foundation that I think all of us have to varying degrees that help us to overcome the isms. And we all face isms, right? People will always find reasons to not like you. They'll find reasons to want to hold you back. It could be color of your skin, could be your gender, could be your religion. It could be, they always will find something. So you got to be strong enough in yourself to be able to overcome all the isms. And so my parents, because of their wisdom, allowed us to be able to do that.
And for context, how old were you at the time where Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated?
Well, that was 1968. I was 13.
You were 13. So
I was 13.
Yeah, you're well aware of what's going on in the world.
Yeah. And I have been a student of the civil rights movement. For some reason, the struggle always captured my imagination. So I would get all the books I could find on the civil rights struggle. And I remember the 3 civil rights workers who were murdered in Mississippi, right? There were 2 kids from New York, 1 kid from Mississippi. It was Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. And these kids were murdered by the KKK in Mississippi. And I was intrigued by that whole episode, the whole story but how it happened, and the FBI getting involved, and President Kennedy and all of it getting involved. So I was always a student, Scott, of the civil rights movement. So I knew about the struggle. I knew about the risk and the danger, but I also knew about the successes of the movement. And that encouraged me. And so my father, with his guidance and mentorship, I was able to direct my anger, right? And this is another thing that's important, Scott, being able to convert anger and fear into productive tasks and decisions. See, many of us are angry for whatever reason. I mean, these guys who stormed the Congress on January 6th, these insurrectionists, they were angry for crazy reasons, but they were angry. So everyone's angry. Everyone has a reason to be angry for something, right? The question is, how do you turn anger and frustration and disappointment into constructive decisions, constructive choices and tasks that will get you to a better place? And I think that is the key to success as a person, as an individual, but also as an entrepreneur, because the struggles will always be there. It's always, you need more money, you need more customers, you need more market share, and then people going against you. So you got to figure out how do you combat that and stay in business.
When you say the Pledge of Allegiance today, I don't know when the last time is you said the Pledge of Allegiance. Do you say for all or for some today?
I say for all, because now I've lived long enough, Scott, to see the progress that America has made. I see it in my children. I see it in my grandchildren. We have come as a country a long way. Scott, this past year, 2020 it's been a tough year for all of us.
to say
the least, yeah. I mean, it's been.
I don't mean to laugh. It's like it's no words really. It's like,
oh my goodness,
attached to 2020. You're like, yeah.
Yeah, right, right. But I tell you what was really inspiring for me. So the George Floyd movement, when those cops killed George Floyd, and the protests, not only in America, around the entire world. I was marching with the young people, and most of the young people, when they marched in Baltimore and in Washington, and I would be out there marching with them. And as I looked at the faces of these young people, it was Black kids, it was white kids, it was Asian kids, it was Latino kids, it was rich kids, it was poor kids, it was America. See, in my day, when we had the civil rights marches and movements, although there were some white partners in that journey, right? But it was mostly African Americans. I mean, you hear a few white faces. And this George Floyd movement, these were kids, and I think, as I talked to them, they had gotten to a point where they said, you know what, I don't care what color I am, the young people, what they did to this man is wrong, and we're not going to take it. The young folks say, you know what, we're not going to take it. And we're going to come out in the streets. And these are diverse kids. These are kids. I mean, there were as many white kids, there were Black kids. And this is they just said, enough is enough. And when I saw that, Scott, I said, wow. I said, now this is what we were marching for in the 60s. That good people, that people of goodwill, regardless of their color or their background or their economic level, whatever status, whatever, when they saw evil, when they saw something that was wrong, that David said, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate that. And this is what I saw in those young people. And I see that my kids' generation, my grandkids' generation, there's still issues of racism and all that. That's always going to be around for a while. But this generation is different. These kids are very comfortable with themselves. They're comfortable with differences. They're comfortable with people who think differently. I mean, in my own family, I now have daughters and sons who are, from China and Australia and Europe, and this is all part of my family. So in one generation, my family has gone from all African-American to now a very diverse family. This is who we are. And these young people, they love who they want to love. They don't care about color or your background. If I love you, I love you. If I want to marry you, I'll marry you. If I want to hang with you, I'm going to hang with you. And that's what gives me courage. I said, wow. I look at that and say, wow. This is why we were marching in the 60s. And I find it to be very encouraging for our nation.
Well, I want to continue on that thread of the young people and also bring it back to entrepreneurship and kind of tie these themes together, because as much progress as you've been able to see over the years of your life, the decades now going back to civil rights through the 70s, through your experience that you've had, one of the challenges that still persist is that in places, it's certain industries, especially like the sector, there's a lot of diversity and inclusion movement. There's, you see companies that do a good job across multiple ethnicities and religious and sexual preference and gender and all of those different aspects of diversity. One of the areas that in some ways almost feels like, using a technology term, the last mile, is really getting that arm extended out to the Black community inside of the tech sector. And this is something I've been working on, not nearly as long as you have, of course, but I'm seeing it. The more I dig into this, and I see things like, there's a great article in the New York Times called Black LinkedIn. It's like all of the Black community in LinkedIn. And it's almost, and when I first heard this term Black LinkedIn, I'm like, is this like a completely different website? So I went to Google and typed in Black LinkedIn and I found the article and I was like, oh, it's just a metaphor for a whole part of LinkedIn where it's like members of the Black community are helping each other. But we're not seeing, and that's just, again, like my ignorance and white privilege, not knowing this even existed. And so I want to talk through, like, what, from your perspective, what can young people do? Like, is the young people that are catching this new wave that we just talked about, they're starting companies and they're like, well, I've got engineers that are Indian and Asian, and we've got women, and we've got, people that are homosexual, and we're doing great. But there's certain parts of that are missing.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to get some perspective from you on what you feel like would be something that even an early stage startup, because you've done this with your own companies, like you started doing mission-based work, even when you were a small company. I saw an interview, you're like, we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of resources. We got some. We're going to dedicate some of those resources and time and money to these efforts overseas to build schools and clinics and hospitals.
Exactly right. That's right.
So can you talk to somebody who might be listening and saying, like, yeah, I get it. I know I should do more, but gosh, like right now I'm just a 10-person company. I'm just trying to raise that next round of capital, but I'll get to it later. And the later thing keeps getting kicked down the road and it never really happens.
It does.
So with that as a backdrop, I'd love to get your perspective on.
Well, this answer may surprise you a little bit. So for entrepreneurs right now, especially young entrepreneurs, their number one objective should be to get their company to profitability as quickly as possible. And the reason I say that, Scott, is it's the old analogy of when you hop on an airplane and they go through their orientation. They tell you, if there's a problem and we lose oxygen and that mask drops, put yours on first and then help your children, or then help the person next to you. Because if you're unconscious, you can't help anybody else. I use the same analogy in business, that the young people, anyone is starting a business, your number one priority is to get your company to profitability as quickly as possible. So the question becomes, well, how do you do that? Well, I would argue that the one way to do that is to have a diverse team that's helping you to build your business. Were you able to watch the Super Bowl this past Sunday?
Yeah, hung out with my son.
And you saw who won, right? Tom Brady and Tampa Bay. But what you may not have known is that the coaching staff of Tampa Bay is the most diverse coaching staff in the NFL, in the history of the NFL. And I know that personally. For many years, I worked as a consultant to the NFL, working with the rookies, players. Tampa Bay's coaching team, they've never had that much diversity. Even women, they had two or three women coaches, unheard of in the NFL. Well, that's a perfect case study of what happens when you bring together like-minded men and women from different backgrounds, and you give them freedom to be great. Freedom to be great. Then they will do amazing things. And so I think that same thing is true with entrepreneurs who are building companies. I'll give you another case study, Scott. So my son, I have 5 kids. 3.5 are engineers. My half is my daughter. She went to Amherst. She majored in history, but minored in computer science. So I give her a half engineer spot. But my middle son, he went to Georgia Tech for engineering, got a degree in mechanical engineering, I think, from Georgia Tech. And then later he went to Stanford Business School and got an MBA from Stanford, right? Started a company. This is years ago, Scott, years ago. Started a company in what he called mobile commerce. I said, well, son, what is that? He said, well, Dad, it is we're going to be get to a point where we're going to be able to buy and sell or do commerce on our smartphones. And this is like 2011, 2012, something that I forget. I said, oh, really? Okay, well, come talk to me. So he came in and he brought his team in, and they presented their case to me and my team and my investors. I said, I don't quite understand it all, but here's a check, okay, and we'll help you raise some more money. So long story short, my son went out and we raised more money for him. He started a company in buying and ordering food over your smartphone. Now, this is pre-Grubhub. So time goes on, he built the company, and long story short, Grubhub approaches us about buying his company, right? So we do the deal, Grubhub buys his company. They use a lot of his technology to accelerate their development of their back office or their infrastructure. My son and us investors, we got cash and stock, right? Pre-IPO stock, Scott, pre-IPO stock. So my son in his 20s became a multimillionaire and by using technology as a platform to meet the needs of society in an emerging, changing environment. But here's my point. When he brought his team in to meet with us, Scott, he had African Americans, Indian Americans, Asian Americans on his team because these young people, they're not conflicted with color like my generation was. They don't care where you come from. If you come from India or China or South Bronx, right? If you can bring value and you can make the team better, come on, you can come on board. And my son is a perfect example of that. And his team now of his new company, very diverse team. So we know by experience, that diversity in these businesses will make a difference. And study after study shows that when the organization is diverse and it has true diversity and inclusion, so it's one thing to be just diverse, but it's another to be inclusive, right? Where you value somebody else's ideas. When they have that kind of environment, Scott, they've shown study after study that organization will perform better and have better results than one that's homogeneous. And so that's a perfect example of that.
And so what would you say to someone who's, listening, they're nodding their head, I should be more diverse, I should be more inclusionary. God, I don't even know how to get there. Because right now, my friends are all from Stanford and they don't, fit that profile. I know I should, but I got 6 months to launch this product because then I'm out of cash and I got to raise again.
Right.
So you're asking me to do something that I could otherwise solve that problem, fill that gap of a person or a key executive at my company, a key contributor, but it's going to take me 5 times as much work to fill that spot.
Right.
Then I could just go to the Stanford alum website and ping my own network of LinkedIn people and hey, I need somebody to do marketing. I need somebody to do sales.
Right.
So what advice would you give to somebody, not just the principle of it, but tactically speaking, have you have any specific strategies that you have seen that can work to get?
I do. There's a couple of things I recommend. Number one is I recommend the strategy of incrementalism, right? So what you do is you do a little bit what you can do at that given time, right? You can't do it all. You can't do it in a big way, but you can incrementally start by changing how you think. And then secondly, you can make a change by immersing yourself in environments that are different than what you're used to. I would guarantee you in every community where your listeners live, there's probably a chapter in that community. There's probably an NAACP. There's probably a YMCA. There are already organizations and institutions that if you get involved, they will put you in contact with people that don't look like you. I gave a speech a couple years ago, Scott, and I, it was predominantly white audience, and I was challenging the audience, and I said this. I said, let's do a little quick survey here. I said, how many of you have neighbors who look different than you do? Some hands went up. I said, how many of you go on vacation with people who look different than you? And the hands began to come down. I said, how many of you go to a country club where there are people who look different than you? And so you can see where I'm going. And that people put themselves in environments where they're not going to have come in contact with people who are different. You've got to force yourself, even if you're uncomfortable. You got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. right? And force yourself into environments where you're going to be around people who are different than you. And then thirdly, I would say this, I would apply, what's it called? The Rooney Rule of diversity. And what is that? It's a rule in the NFL where they were trying to get more Black coaches to be coaches of NFL teams. And they weren't getting this progress. And so I think it's Rooney Rule, but whatever it's called, Scott, what it says is to owners, when there's a vacancy for a coach, all I'm asking you to do, Mr. Owner, is to at least interview diverse candidates, right? At least have them on the agenda, right? Let them interview. I'm not saying you gotta hire them, but at least interview them. I would say the same thing to founders of companies. As you're looking for new talent, you're looking to expand your team, be intentional, at least talk to some people who don't fit into your comfort zone, right? At least do that. And what you'll find is, I think they'll find is that, they'll say, wow, there's some smart people out here. They're great people. Well, I didn't even know there's so many women or African Americans or Latino Americans who had these skills. And before you know it, you've got this great thing happening, this great ecosystem evolving. And like my son, you create this company that, has value and people want to buy it.
I really love that advice. And I know from personal experience, just over the past, 6 to 9 months, where I've become more aware of, my responsibility to work on some of what we're talking about.
Right.
Just reaching out to people on LinkedIn, sending connection requests to people that I don't know, but I've read their article on LinkedIn. And I said, Elizabeth Levy is somebody that comes to mind on LinkedIn who I follow. And
right.
I can't even remember what exactly I ran into one of her articles, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to just send her a connection request because she's doing some really incredible things. And she accepted it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I mean, like, all I have to do is like say hello and like, hey, you, and like, there's no agenda. I just wanted to start building a better network of people that were leaders in the Black community. And I started doing that more often. And what I found is, like, once I started asking for a little bit of help and not asking for the answers to the test, because that's my job. Like, I'm not telling you, tell me what to do. No, my job is to figure it out.
Right.
But if I say, this is what I'd like to do, where would you go first?
Right.
Like, every person has been helpful. And now I've talked to people at Howard University about their tech entrepreneur program.
Absolutely.
As the executive as a consultant at McKinsey, who wants to get more involved. I've talked to one of our clients who helps people in underprivileged communities get jobs. And we've started talking about a project we might work on.
Sure.
It's actually not hard. This incrementalism, I think, is exactly what I did. I was like, I'm going to spend an hour a week just like making this, just like as if I was prospecting for clients. I'm going to do a power hour. Same thing, but with good intention, right? It can't be misguided. It can't be with some agenda. And to your point, like, all of a sudden now we're having this conversation.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't like I stopped doing everything and started doing just this. It was just like diet or exercise or nutrition or sleep or anything in relationships is like a little bit at a time. And all of a sudden you start to see the flywheel start to kick in.
So now Scott, to your point. So just take you and I. So now our paths have crossed. They will forever be crossed. Right. This is a relationship that it'll grow or whatever, but it is, right? I give you a perfect example of that, Scott. So 2 years ago, I went on a sabbatical, a 6-month sabbatical, and I'm working on a new book on global entrepreneurship. I wanted to know, because my other books have been about, entrepreneurship from an American perspective, right? From an African-American perspective and American perspective in general. I wanted to now broaden that to a global one, right? So I got on the ship, my wife and I, and we went around the world. We traveled on ship, 35 countries, 100 ports of call. Here's the point I want to make. So on this cruise, Scott, brand new ship, first time they ever done the internet around the world cruise. So it's brand new, everything's great, right? We get on the ship, Scott, we get on the ship, and it's 900 passengers. How many of them do you think were African American?
I'm going to go with 2.
2. 2, right? My wife and I, Scott, right? The average age was in the mid 70s. So you had 898 white folks. You had 2 Black folks, me and my wife. The average age was in the mid 70s. We're younger than that, right? And we're on a ship for 6 months, right? So I'm in the gym one day working out, and I get on the team with these two white women, and we're doing cardio. So we get to talking, one of them, and the lady says to me, she says, "So tell me, are you a professional athlete, or are you part of the entertainment?" Right? So in her mind, the reason I was on that ship, not because I'm a tech entrepreneur, not because I probably make more money than she does, but in her mind, he's either got to be a professional athlete or he's part of the entertainment. Now, so you imagine, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. And she's watching Fox News. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be a long cruise, right? It's going to be a long cruise, right?
Short workout, though. Up or down.
So I go back to my room, and Scott, I'm livid. I'm cursing, telling my wife out. We got to get off this ship. Da, 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 da. But then I thought about it, Scott, and this is where grace comes in. And this is what I wanted to share with you, the power of grace. So I had two choices. I could have been bitter and angry because she offended me. She assumed because I was a Black man, I was either an athlete or a part of entertainment, right? Or I could say, let me give her the benefit of the doubt. Let me assume, just assume, grace. Let me assume she meant no harm. Let me assume that it was her way of trying to connect with me and she meant no harm, right? Let me assume that. So next day, Scott, we're in the gym, we get to talking again. And long story short, this woman and I, by the time we were done in 6 months, we were just like that. And we still stay in contact today. Now, why is that important? Because of the power of grace. I gave her grace. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. And I said, she probably didn't mean any harm by that. So let me engage with her again. And let's continue the conversation. And Scott, by doing that, we went to dinner. We're traveling in Egypt and in Australia and New Zealand. We're trucking through the jungles together. We became friends because of the power of grace. And what I'm suggesting to you listeners is, if all of us commit to just having a little bit of grace with one another, that when we mess up, when we say something that may be, insensitive or whatever, let's give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that they meant well, and let us keep talking to each other. Let us keep being around each other. And you'll be amazed. And like you said, at the friendships and relationships that you can build if you just extend grace to people.
I can't think of a better way to wrap things up. I've still got like 5 more pages of notes, but I guess we'll have to find a time at some point to do this again, or find a time to get together when it's safe and easy to do that.
Sure.
So, I mean, you do a lot of things. You've got BITHGROUP, you've got Bithenergy, you've got robertwallace.com, you've got EntreTeach Learning System that you run with your daughter, Taylor, right?
Right.
So lots of places where you're active. Where's the best place for people to go if they just want to learn more about you? You've written, I think, 8 books. This will be your 9th that you're working on. You've got interviews on YouTube. Like, if people just engage more with what you do and learn from you and your experience, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, of course, they can always Google Robert Wallace, Robert L. Wallace, right? They can go to robertwallace.com, which will launch them to our IT work, our energy work, the books, a lot of that. And also, Scott, this may surprise you, I recently ran for mayor of Baltimore City.
We didn't get to that, and I wanted to ask you. But yeah.
Scott, that's another intersection I'm predicting in my new writings that entrepreneurs are going to be responsible for, and that is leading our country and our society. I believe I can't think of a better person with the skills than an entrepreneur to lead us politically. And I believe that more, as time goes on, more men and women who have started out in business are going to be moving into politics. And I felt the same way as running for mayor, and I ran as an independent in a Democratic city. But I saw what was happening in Baltimore, didn't like what I saw, didn't see any solutions. I'm an engineer businessman. I said, you know what? I can do better than this. I can help the city. And so I jumped in with my own money. I did raise some money also, Scott, but my own money, by God's grace, I was able to write a big check to my campaign to make a difference, And I am predicting that more entrepreneurs, as they build their businesses and build their wealth, they will pivot into politics.
Will you run for another office again?
Probably not mayor. I may run for governor. I may run for president.
Nice.
So probably not Mayor Scott. I mean, you have to be, I mean, I couldn't have picked a more challenging times to run for mayor in the middle of a pandemic. Can you imagine that? So yeah, I'm running for mayor. First time, I was the first independent in Baltimore's history to make it on the ballot. All right. I mean, we broke all the rules, made history. We came in second place, became behind the Democrat and way ahead of the Republican candidate. We just made history here. So now we built this base of people in Baltimore City who are ready for change. They're ready for new leadership. So we're putting together a new organization to bring those people together so we can continue to work on making Baltimore a better city.
Yeah, and the person who won the mayoral race, he's very young, if I'm not mistaken.
36.
36. Brandon Scott.
We're different generations. He's a career politician. All he's ever done since
Can you
college.
be a career anything at 34?
I mean, just been at City Hall in Baltimore his whole young career. Now, I have extended to him grace, to say, sir, Mr. Mayor, I'm willing to help you any way that I can. Nice young man. I thought he didn't have a lot of experience to solve the problems of our city, but he won. Unlike some people, I respect democracy. Right. When you lose an election, you say you lose, you admit you lost, and you congratulate the winner and do all you can to help the winner. And so I made myself available to the mayor, the current mayor. But I believe that it would take people like you and I to fix our society. I really do. The problems that we face, like in Baltimore, poverty, lack of jobs, crime, violence, dysfunction, hopelessness, those things I believe will be solved by men and women who are either entrepreneurs or they think like entrepreneurs. These are the men and women who are going to solve our problems in our communities and make our country a better place.
Well, thanks for that. And thanks for running for office, because I think you likely got some good, I can imagine what the conversations must have been like in Baltimore throughout the summer and fall.
Oh my goodness. I tell you, it's by the grace of God, I didn't get COVID because I was the only candidate out there canvassing, Scott, in neighborhoods. I mean, I'm shaking hands. I mean, I was safe. I wore a mask and all that. But I mean, I'm out in the neighborhood shaking hands, hugging people. And by God's grace, I didn't get sick.
Wow. That sounds risky.
Yeah, it was at times. I mean, I try to keep my distance, Scott, but when you're out in the communities and people like what you're saying, they believe in you, it's kind of automatic. They want to hug you. Yeah. And sometimes you can't push them away, It's like, you
wear 2 masks.
Yeah, right.
Well, good. Well, I'm definitely going to be following on the political side, as well as all of the great stuff that I read and watched coming into our conversation today. I'm so appreciative of you spending this time with me and the people listening, and just being willing to open up around your story. I've learned a lot just getting to know you over the last couple months as we've gotten in touch and getting ready for this. And we don't have too many folks in the next generation up, on the podcast. So I'm usually the old guy, and I'm 46. Yeah, right. So this is great. Not that you're old, but you're older. Yeah. You're the next generation.
Well, I can tell you when you're old. When you're old, when you go to a party and it's an oldie and goodies party, and they're playing music from the 90s.
Yeah, I know.
That's oldie but goodies. I'm like, what?
Yeah, like Nirvana. Never heard.
Yeah, right.
Were they getting good? No, they were all right.
They're all right.
No, man, I've learned a lot. I'm really grateful for your graciousness, and I definitely you'll be hearing from me, because I've got some ideas that if you are open to exploring them with me and some of the folks I'm working with. Sure. I know you're a very, very busy man, taking cruises around the world, writing books. Tough life.
It was a great cruise. I loved it. As a matter of fact, we're thinking about doing a part two one, Scott. But we'll see. But this book I'm working on global. I wanted to really pull together global entrepreneurship. What's happening in Australia? What's happening in New Zealand? What's happening in China and India and Indonesia and Africa and the Middle East and Europe? I mean, how are these entrepreneurs, how are they collaborating, and how is it different? And, oh man, it was just so exciting. I'm very excited about this book. So I hope that it will be helpful to people like you and the young generation, because these young people are collaborating, they're innovating. My kids now are all over the world. They're in China, they're in Mexico, they're in Brazil, they're in Australia. I mean, because they are comfortable, Scott. They're comfortable with being in a different environment. They're comfortable with people who are different from them. My kids, they know multiple languages. They speak Portuguese and Spanish and Japanese and Chinese. I mean, it's a different world, and it's an exciting world. And so I want to encourage your listeners to keep innovating, keep dreaming, because I couldn't think of a better time to be a young person who is motivated and intentional about building business and creating wealth in this time that we're in today.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity, despite however tumultuous things are.
That's true.
In the short run, I think history has shown, whether it was the housing crash in 08 or 09, we came out of that just fine. There was the terrorist attacks in 2001, we came out of that. We had the Great Recession in the 80s, we came out of that. I mean, the civil rights movement, we came out of that. So there's cycles, and I think staying driven and staying focused and persistent and positive. You've talked about that in previous talks. You've talked about purpose and perseverance and perspective as being three key parts to success. So I think those are really good axioms for anyone to follow. If you just have a purpose, you persevere, and you have some good perspective. I agree. This is just going to be a blip in the radar in 5 years.
Absolutely.
I hope.
Absolutely. And life is short. So don't wait too long, right? Don't waste time. Life is short. Yeah. So you go now. Do what you can with what you have, where you are, and do it now. It's my advice. That.
Bob, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to let you get on with your day. Okay. You'll definitely be hearing from me. And please let me know how I can help you with your mission. Okay.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you, Bob. You too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, folks, that's a wrap. I hope that if you enjoyed that conversation even half as much as I did, that you walk out of here not just motivated, but also really clear on some next steps that you can take as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, as a leader, whether you run a business or a leader within your family, within your community, within your business, within the business where you might be working, on what you can be doing to do better, to do more, to not just around this idea of diversity and inclusion, but also just how to be a better entrepreneur, how to be a better person. Bob has been successful throughout his career, as you can tell. And even now, 40 years into his professional career, he's still going strong. It doesn't look like he's slowing up anytime soon. So I hope that, if you're on the younger end of the spectrum, maybe you're in your 20s or 30s and you're trying to figure out where can I take my life, then he's a great model for you. If you're, more like me in your 40s or getting into your 50s, I think Bob is a great example of what still can be done and how people like us can make a difference every single day, whether it's with our friends, with our family, with our community, with our business, with our clients every single day. So thank you so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. I would really appreciate it if you could help me out by doing two things. Number one, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show. Let other people know what you like about the show and let us know what we can do to make it even better. And then please share this episode with a friend or 10. Send them a text, send them an email, copy and paste, do whatever you need to do. Say, hey, listen, I've been checking out this podcast, the Startup Selling Show. I think you'll really enjoy this episode. Send it to a friend or 10 because viral is still the best way for us to spread the word and help us continue to grow the listenership here on this podcast. So that's it for now. Thanks so much again for listening. This is Scott Sambucci signing off.